Don't let him go inside. Lena's voice cut through the quiet like something that didn't belong there, sharp, urgent, almost trembling but not breaking as the security guards tightened their hold on her arms at the edge of the circular driveway, their polished shoes scraping lightly against the stone as if unsure whether this moment was routine or something else entirely. The massive iron gates behind her still slowly closing with a low mechanical hum while the long black Rolls-Royce eased to a stop beneath the soft glow of the mansion's exterior lights, and for a second, everything seemed to hold its breath as Richard Cole stepped out, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit with the calm precision of a man who had never once been denied entry into any place that bore his name, his eyes flicking toward the scene with mild irritation rather than concern, as if what he was witnessing was nothing more than a scheduling inconvenience. A disruption to an otherwise controlled evening, and Lena lifted her head, strands of her dark hair clinging to her cheek, her uniform slightly wrinkled from the struggle but her gaze steady, locked onto him with a kind of focus that didn't match her position, didn't match the badge clipped to her chest that marked her as just another night cleaner, invisible, replaceable, someone meant to move quietly through hallways and leave no trace behind, yet here she was, refusing to disappear. "Sir, please," she said again, her voice lower now but somehow stronger, as if the urgency had settled into something deeper, something certain, but Richard barely slowed his stride, his shoes clicking softly against the stone as he moved past them toward the front steps, the tall glass doors of the mansion reflecting his silhouette back at him, perfect and untouchable, the kind of reflection he trusted, the kind that had never lied to him, and behind that glass, the interior lights glowed warm and steady, chandeliers casting soft gold across marble floors, everything exactly as it should be, everything under control, except Lena's eyes didn't move, not from him, not from the door, her breathing uneven but her posture refusing to collapse, as if something inside her was holding the line no one else could see. "There's something wrong in the house," she said, and this time the words didn't sound like panic, they sounded like a warning placed carefully into the air, but the guard shifted, exchanging a brief glance, uncertain, while Richard reached the top step and paused only long enough to let out a quiet exhale, the kind that came from a man accustomed to being right, to being obeyed, to moving forward without hesitation, his hand rising toward the door handle with practiced ease, and in that small space between movement and contact, the night seemed to narrow. The distant sound of the gate locking into place, echoing faintly behind them, the breeze brushing lightly against the glass, and somewhere, almost too subtle to notice, something felt off, not loud, not obvious, just a quiet disruption beneath the surface of perfection, the kind most people would ignore, but Lena didn't, she couldn't, her voice breaking through once more, softer now but cutting deeper. "Please don't open that door." Richard Cole's fingers hovered just inches from the handle, the polished metal reflecting the faint tremor in his movement, though he would never have called it hesitation, not out loud, not even to himself, because hesitation implied doubt, and doubt was something he had trained out of his life years ago, replaced with decisions that moved fast and clean and unquestioned, yet something in the air pressed against his instincts now. Subtle but present, like a whisper beneath the surface of silence, and behind him, Lena's breathing slowed, not because the tension had eased but because she had already said everything she could say, already crossed a line she was never meant to cross. And now all that remained was whether he would listen or not, the guards still holding her but no longer pulling, their grip uncertain, their posture less rigid as the moment stretched longer than it should have. As if the scene itself was waiting for something unseen to reveal itself, and Richard finally turned his head just slightly, enough to look at her over his shoulder, really look this time, not at her uniform or her position but at her face, at the steadiness in her eyes that did not match fear, did not match panic, something else entirely, something grounded and certain in a way that unsettled him more than shouting ever could. "You are telling me there is something wrong in my house," he said, his voice low and controlled, each word measured, and Lena nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Yes, sir," she replied, and there was no apology in her tone, no attempt to soften the statement, just truth placed plainly between them, and for a brief second, the world narrowed to that exchange, to the quiet space between power and warning, and then the wind shifted, barely noticeable but enough to stir the edge of the curtains inside, a soft movement behind the glass that caught Richard's attention, his gaze flicking back to the door. To the reflection of the interior. Lights that now seemed slightly uneven, not flickering exactly but not entirely steady either, and he frowned, the smallest crease forming between his brows, a reaction so rare it almost felt foreign, while somewhere deep inside the house, something made a faint sound, not loud enough to be identified, just a light, irregular tick that did not belong to any rhythm he recognized, and Lena's fingers tightened slightly against the guard's sleeve. Not struggling, just bracing, as if she could feel the seconds passing in a way no one else could. "I was on the east wing," she said carefully, her voice steady but softer now, guiding rather than pleading. "I smelled something, and then I heard it." Richard did not respond immediately, his hand lowering just an inch from the handle, not retreating but no longer advancing either, suspended in a decision that no one around him dared interrupt, and the guards shifted again, exchanging another glance, their authority fading into uncertainty as the atmosphere around them grew heavier, the kind of weight that did not come from noise or chaos but from something invisible pressing inward, and Richard inhaled slowly, the night air cool and clean against his lungs, and for a moment he considered the possibility that this was nothing, that this was an overreaction from someone who did not understand the systems of a house like his, the safeguards, the precision, the control. Yet the thought did not settle the way it should have, it lingered. Incomplete, as the faint ticking sound reached his ears again, just enough to be noticed, just enough to disrupt the certainty he relied on, and without fully realizing it, he took a half-step back from the door, his gaze shifting once more to Lena, this time not with irritation, but with something quieter, something closer to recognition, as if for the first time he was considering that the person he had dismissed might be the only one in that moment who truly understood what was about to happen. The space between them held longer than it should have, stretched thin by something neither side could fully name, and Richard Coles slowly lowered his hand completely from the door, not as a surrender but as a recalibration, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the glass in front of him again, not the reflection this time but what lay beyond it. The soft, golden light inside now carrying a faint haze that had not been there before. Subtle enough to miss if you were not looking for it, and behind him, Lena exhaled quietly, not in relief but in preparation, because she knew this moment was not over, it was only shifting, and the guards loosened their hold just enough for her to stand straighter, her shoulders lifting as she steadied herself, her voice calm when she spoke again. "The smell started about 10 minutes ago," she said, her words careful, precise. "At first I thought it was coming from the kitchen, but it was not cooking, it was different." Richard's jaw tightened slightly as he listened, not interrupting this time, his attention pulled into her explanation despite himself, while the faint ticking sound returned, just barely audible through the door, irregular, mechanical, wrong in a way that did not belong in a house designed for perfection. And his eyes flicked toward the side panel where the security system interface sat embedded in the wall, its small indicator light glowing steady green. Unchanged, reassuring, yet somehow that reassurance felt thinner now, less absolute, as if it no longer carried the weight it once did, and Lena took a small step forward as the guards released her completely, not out of permission but out of uncertainty, their authority fading into the background as the situation moved beyond something they could define. "There is a utility panel on the east side," she continued, her hands still, her posture grounded. "I heard the ticking there first, like something trying to cycle but not completing." Richard followed her words in his mind, mapping them onto the layout of the house, the systems, the redundancies he had paid millions to ensure would never fail, and yet the details she described were too specific to dismiss, too aligned with something deeper than guesswork, and for the first time, a quiet tension settled into his chest, not fear, not yet, but awareness, the kind that comes when certainty begins to fracture at the edges, and he stepped back another inch from the door, his gaze moving from the handle to the frame, to the faint seam where it met the structure, as if he could see through it by force of will alone, while the night air shifted again, carrying with it the faintest trace of something sharp, almost metallic, barely there, but enough to register, enough to confirm that what Lena had sensed was not imagined, and the silence around them deepened, no longer empty but filled with possibility, with consequence, with the weight of what might have already been set in motion, and Richard finally spoke again, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier edge. "Why did no one else report this?" And Lena met his gaze without hesitation. "Because no one else was listening," she said simply, and the words landed heavier than anything that had come before, not loud, not dramatic, just true, and in that truth, something shifted again, something quiet but irreversible, as the man who controlled everything realized that control had nearly led him somewhere he could not see, and that the only reason he had stopped was because someone he would have never noticed refused to stay silent. Richard Cole did not move toward the door again, not yet, his body angled slightly away now as if some instinct deeper than logic had already made the decision for him, even if his mind was still catching up, and the quiet stretched between them, thick with realization, while the faint ticking inside the house grew just a fraction louder, still subtle but no longer ignorable, like a clock out of sync with the rest of the world. And Lena watched him carefully, not with expectation but with a steady patience that came from knowing she had already done the hardest part, she had been heard, and now what happened next no longer depended on her, yet she did not step back, did not retreat into silence, because something about the air still felt unfinished, still carrying a warning that had not fully revealed itself, and Richard turned his head toward the security panel again, his eyes scanning the interface. The green indicators, the flawless design that promised control and safety, and for a moment he reached toward it, his fingers hovering just above the screen before pulling back, as if he no longer trusted the simplicity of what it showed him, and instead he looked to Lena, not as a subordinate now but as a source. "Where exactly did you hear it?" he asked, his voice quieter than before, stripped of command, and Lena pointed toward the east side of the house, her hand steady. "Behind the secondary utility wall, near the backup generator line," she said, each word precise, and the detail landed differently this time, not as an intrusion but as information, and Richard nodded once, almost to himself, mapping it out, calculating distances, systems, possibilities, while the guards stepped further back, their presence fading as the center of control shifted away from them entirely, and the night air seemed to cool around the edges of the moment, carrying that faint metallic scent again, sharper now, enough to confirm what could no longer be dismissed, and Richard exhaled slowly, a long controlled breath that did not quite steady him the way it normally would, and then he spoke again, not to Lena but to the space itself. "No one enters the house." The command was clear but different now, not driven by authority but by caution, and the guards immediately straightened, nodding, their roles snapping back into place under a new directive, while Lena lowered her hand, her shoulders easing just slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on the structure, as if she could still feel something inside it shifting, unseen, unresolved, and Richard took a step down from the entrance, putting distance between himself and the door, the movement small but significant, a break from the momentum he had carried only moments before, and he reached for his phone, his fingers moving quickly now, dialing, his voice low and urgent as he spoke to someone on the other end, calling for a systems check, for immediate inspection. His words clipped but controlled, yet beneath that control was something new, something unfamiliar, the recognition that he had nearly walked into a situation he did not understand, and that recognition settled into him with a quiet weight, and as he ended the call, he glanced once more at Lena, not with gratitude yet, not with apology, but with a shift that was unmistakable. A reevaluation, as if the outline of who she was had changed in his mind, no longer just part of the background but part of the reason he was still standing where he was, outside, breathing, aware, and the ticking from within the house continued, steady, unresolved, marking time in a way that made every second feel more important than the last. The call ended but the silence did not return to what it had been before, it changed shape, tightening around the house like something invisible had begun to press outward from within, and Richard stood still for a moment longer, phone still in his hand, his thumb resting against the dark screen as if waiting for it to light up again with answers he no longer fully trusted, while the ticking continued, faint but steady. No longer something that could be dismissed as imagination or background noise, it had rhythm now, a pattern that felt deliberate, and Lena shifted her weight slightly, her shoes scraping softly against the stone, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just holding her place as her eyes remained fixed on the east side of the house, where the structure met shadow and the lights did not reach as cleanly. "It is getting stronger," she said quietly, not raising her voice, not needing to, because the tension in the air carried her words farther than sound ever could. And Richard glanced toward where she was looking, his gaze tracing the outline of the building, the clean lines of architecture that once represented control now feeling almost too still, too perfect, like something waiting. And in the distance, a faint hum began to surface beneath the ticking, low and uneven, like a system trying to correct itself but failing to find balance, and his jaw tightened slightly, the calculation in his eyes sharpening as he began to connect what he was hearing with what he knew: gas lines, electrical relays, backup systems designed to overlap and protect, yet something had slipped between them, something had gone unnoticed, and that realization settled heavier than anything else, not because of the danger alone, but because of how close he had come to walking straight into it without question, and the guards, now standing a few feet back, exchanged another glance. Their earlier certainty replaced with a quiet alertness, one of them instinctively stepping farther from the door, as if the instinct to create distance had finally caught up to the situation, and Richard took another step away from the entrance, this time without hesitation, his posture no longer angled toward the house but away from it, his focus shifting from ownership to assessment, from control to response. And in that shift, something fundamental changed, something that could not be reversed, while Lena's shoulders lowered just slightly. Not in relief but in acknowledgement that the line she had drawn had held, that he had listened, even if only at the last possible second, and the air carried that metallic edge again, sharper now, unmistakable, threading through the cool night breeze in a way that made it impossible to ignore, and Richard inhaled carefully, slower this time, as if measuring the air itself, his senses adjusting, recalibrating, and then he spoke again, his voice firm but different, grounded in something more cautious than before. "Everyone stays clear of the east side," he said, and the guards nodded immediately, stepping farther back, widening the space around the house as if instinct had finally aligned with instruction, and for a brief moment, the entire scene felt suspended, the mansion standing silent and illuminated against the dark sky, beautiful and untouched on the outside, while inside, something unseen continued to tick, to hum, to build towards something none of them could yet see. And Richard's eyes moved once more to Lena, holding there a second. Longer than before, as if trying to understand how she had seen what everyone else had missed. And in that look, there was no dismissal left, only the quiet weight of a truth he could not ignore, that the person he had almost silenced had been the only reason he had stepped back in time. The night seemed to dim without the lights actually changing, as if the air itself had thickened just enough to bend the glow around the mansion, and everything slowed, not in movement but in perception, each second stretching longer than the last while the faint ticking inside continued to mark time in a rhythm that now felt unavoidable, and Lena stood very still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing measured, her attention anchored to the east wing where the shadow met the structure, where the problem had begun, and for a moment there was no sound from anyone, not from the guards, not from Richard, not even from the distant road beyond the gates, just that quiet, persistent ticking and the low uneven hum beneath it, like a system struggling to correct itself but falling further out of sync, and Richard shifted his stance slightly, his weight settling differently, less forward, less certain, his gaze no longer scanning for control but listening, really listening. The way someone does when they realize what they hear matters more than what they see, and his eyes traced the outline of the house again, the tall windows, the clean edges, the symmetry that once represented perfection now carrying a subtle distortion, something almost imperceptible but undeniable, and he exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him in a controlled stream that did not quite settle the tension in his chest, because this was not a situation that could be solved with instinct alone, it required time. And time was exactly what felt uncertain now, and Lena took a small step forward, not toward the house but slightly closer to him, her voice quiet when she spoke. "When it started, it was softer than this," she said, her words careful, as if placing them into the space without disturbing it. But it kept repeating, like it could not complete the cycle. And Richard nodded once, almost unconsciously, his mind already aligning with what she was describing, understanding the implication without needing it explained, and the guards, now several feet back, stood with a different posture entirely, no longer enforcing, no longer reacting, just present, waiting, their earlier certainty replaced with a stillness that mirrored the tension in the air, and a breeze moved again, gentle but enough to carry that sharp metallic scent more clearly this time, threading through the quiet and settling into the edges of awareness, unmistakable now, and Richard's eyes narrowed slightly as he took it in. His senses adjusting, confirming what logic had already begun to accept. And for a brief moment, everything held, the house, the air, the people around it, all suspended in a fragile balance, as if the next sound, the next shift, would determine what happened next, and Lena's gaze softened just slightly, not with relief but with recognition, because she knew this moment, this stillness, it was the space between danger and understanding, the narrow edge where everything could still change. And Richard lowered his phone to his side, no longer checking it, no longer waiting for instructions from somewhere else, his attention fully present now, grounded in the reality in front of him, and he spoke again, quieter than before, almost to himself. "It is still building." And Lena did not answer, because she knew he was no longer asking, he was realizing, and the ticking continued, steady, patient, counting down something none of them could yet see, while the night around them remained silent, as if even the world beyond the gates had paused to wait for what would happen next. The sound came before the movement, a sharp click from somewhere deep within the walls followed by a subtle shift in the air pressure, the kind that most people would never notice, but in that moment it felt unmistakable, like the house itself had just taken a breath it could not hold, and Richard's head turned instantly toward the east wing, his focus narrowing as the faint hum beneath the ticking suddenly stuttered, rising and falling in an uneven pulse that no longer tried to hide itself. And then, without warning, the soft glow from the interior lights flickered once, not completely, just enough to break their steady rhythm, enough to confirm that something inside had crossed the threshold, and Lena's eyes widened slightly, not in fear but in recognition, because this was the point she had been trying to stop, the moment where the unseen became undeniable, and Richard took another step back, faster this time. His posture shifting fully from observation to action, his voice cutting through the silence with a new clarity. "Move everyone farther back, now!" And the guards did not hesitate, their earlier uncertainty gone as urgency replaced it, their movements quick but controlled as they widened the distance between themselves and the structure, while the ticking inside grew sharper, more defined, no longer faint but distinct, each second landing heavier than the last, and Richard's gaze locked onto the house, not with ownership but with calculation, his mind racing through possibilities, through systems, through failure points that should not have existed but clearly did, and Lena stepped closer again, just enough for her voice to reach him without breaking the tension of the moment. "It is the gas line," she said, steady and certain. "And the relay is trying to reset." And he looked at her immediately, the pieces aligning in an instant, gas accumulation, electrical cycling, a loop that could not stabilize, and his expression changed, not dramatically, but in a way that carried weight, because now he understood not just that something was wrong, but how close it had come to being too late, and the air shifted again, carrying that sharp metallic scent stronger than before, unmistakable now, undeniable, and for a brief second, everything seemed to tighten, the space, the silence, the distance between cause and consequence narrowing into something fragile, something that could tip with the smallest change. And then the front lights flickered again, this time longer, dimming before returning, and Richard's breath slowed deliberately, his control returning not as certainty but as discipline, the kind that holds steady even when the outcome is unknown, and he spoke again, quieter but firm. "No one goes near that door." And Lena nodded once, her shoulders steady, her eyes still fixed on the house. Because she knew the danger had not passed, it had only revealed itself, and the ticking continued, louder now, each second echoing in the space between them, marking time not just as a measure, but as a warning, and in that moment, the truth settled fully into Richard's awareness. That if he had taken one more step earlier, if he had ignored her voice, if he had trusted the reflection instead of the reality, he would have walked straight into something he could not control, and the weight of that realization stayed with him, silent, heavy, undeniable, as the night held its breath around them, waiting for what would come next. The flickering stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the house standing in an eerie stillness that felt heavier than the movement before it, like a system that had not fixed itself but paused, holding tension beneath the surface. And Richard remained where he was, his eyes fixed on the structure, no longer searching for signs but absorbing what he already knew, while the ticking continued, steady and deliberate. Each second now carrying meaning, no longer just sound but consequence. Measured in time, and then, from somewhere along the side of the house, a faint mechanical hiss joined the rhythm, soft but unmistakable, like pressure finding a narrow path to escape, and Lena closed her eyes for a brief moment, not out of fear but focus, aligning what she heard with what she had already understood, and when she opened them again, her gaze moved directly to Richard, steady and clear. "It is venting," she said, her voice calm. "But not fast enough." And the words settled into the space between them with a quiet weight, because they did not bring relief, only context, and Richard nodded once, his expression tightening slightly as he processed it, his mind already calculating what that meant, how long it would take, what margin they still had, and in that moment, the man who had built his life on certainty stood in front of something that refused to follow his rules, something that required him to trust a voice he would have ignored just minutes ago, and he turned toward Lena fully now, not partially, not over his shoulder, but facing her, his posture straight, his attention undivided, and for a second neither of them spoke, because the shift did not need words. It was already there, visible in the way he looked at her, not above, not past, but directly, as if recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the situation, and then he spoke, his voice lower than before, stripped of distance. "You knew," he said, not as a question but as recognition, and Lena did not nod, did not explain, she simply held his gaze, because this was not about proving anything, it was about what had already happened, and behind them, the guards stood still, watching, their earlier roles dissolved into something quieter, more human, as they witnessed a moment that no longer followed the structure they were used to, and the air carried that sharp scent again, thinning slightly now but still present, still enough to remind them that the danger had not fully passed, only shifted, and Richard exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him heavier than before, not from fear but from understanding, and when he spoke again, his words were different, not an order, not a command, but something else, something closer to acknowledgement. "You stopped me," he said, and Lena's expression did not change, not because the words meant nothing, but because she had not acted for recognition, she had acted because she could not ignore what she saw, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was full, filled with everything that had almost happened, everything that had been avoided by a single moment of refusal, and Richard glanced once more at the house, then back at her, and for the first time since he stepped out of the car, there was no distance left in his gaze, only clarity, only the quiet acceptance of a truth he could not deny, that the line between control and consequence had been drawn not by him, but by the person he had almost ordered away, and the ticking continued, softer now, but still present. A reminder that some things do not stop all at once, they fade, they settle. They leave behind a silence that carries more weight than sound ever could. The ticking faded gradually, not disappearing all at once but dissolving into the silence like a storm that had already passed yet still lingered in the air, and the house stood unchanged on the outside, its lights steady again, its structure calm, as if nothing had ever been wrong, but the stillness now carried a different meaning, not control, not perfection, but aftermath, and Richard remained where he was. His shoulders no longer tense but not relaxed either, his posture settled into something quieter, something reflective, as his eyes moved slowly across the facade of the place he had built, the place he believed he understood completely, and for the first time, it felt unfamiliar, not because it had changed, but because he had, and Lena stood a few feet away, her presence steady but unobtrusive, as if she was already stepping back into the space she had come from, not seeking attention, not waiting for acknowledgement, just allowing the moment to settle, and a distant set of headlights appeared beyond the gate, approaching slowly, the low hum of an incoming vehicle breaking the silence in a controlled, expected way, and Richard glanced toward it briefly before looking back at the house, then at Lena, and there was no urgency left in his gaze now, only clarity, the kind that comes after something nearly lost is suddenly understood, and he took a slow step toward her, not closing the distance entirely, but enough to shift the space between them from separation to connection, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the sharpness from before, none of the distance, just something grounded, something real. "You saw what no one else did," he said, and Lena lowered her eyes for a moment, not out of submission but humility, then lifted them again, meeting his gaze with the same quiet steadiness she had held from the beginning. "I just paid attention," she replied, and the simplicity of the words settled deeper than anything else that had been said that night, because they held no pride, no accusation, just truth, and Richard nodded slowly, absorbing that, understanding that what had nearly happened was not prevented by systems or power or control, but by awareness, by presence, by someone choosing not to ignore what others would have dismissed, and the vehicle rolled closer, its lights washing briefly across the driveway, casting long shadows that stretched and then disappeared, and in that shifting light, the space between them felt smaller, not physically, but in meaning, as if the difference that once defined their roles had quietly dissolved, replaced by something more human, more equal, and Richard glanced once more at the house. Then back at Lena, and for a brief second, he seemed to search for something to say, something that would match the weight of what had just passed, but nothing came that felt sufficient, and so he did not force it, he simply nodded once, a gesture small but sincere, and turned slightly toward the approaching vehicle, already preparing for what came next, for the explanations, the inspections, the corrections that would follow. But before he moved any further, he paused. Just long enough to look back at her one last time, and in that look, there was no authority, no hierarchy, just recognition, and Lena, standing quietly in the soft edge of the light, did not move, did not speak, she simply stood there as the night settled around them, the danger gone, the silence returned, and somewhere in that silence, something had shifted permanently, not in the house, but in the way it would be seen from that moment on.